into the air in the round of the great track pilot level gift from Duxford down on the 20th of July 1951, and it came into RAF service about 3 years later. The main power plant for the Hunter was the Rolls-Royce Avon. But there was an alternative that was used even as our shuttle collection pilot these days. Here goes the Consolidated PBY 5A. What can you say about the Catalina, Colin?
In the ocean, and this particular aircraft would have performed sterling service in research. Rather aptly describes the kind of work that this particular lady would have carried out.
It was as a long-range patrol bomber that the Consolidated PBY was initially designed. There was a potential Japanese threat in the Pacific, of course, that was recognised even before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the Catalina was the aircraft that met that requirement. It was a pure flying boat at that stage, but this is a PBY 5A model, A for amphibian.
The first thing you notice about this particular aircraft is the wing, of course. Great big barn door of a wing. It's a really good short-field performance. Takes off very, very quickly.
Some of the exploits they were involved in really were very famous indeed. US Navy Catalinas spotted a Japanese fleet making towards Midway, and it was a Canadian Kanso, as the type was known, when built by the Canadians, like this one, that spotted a Japanese invasion force heading for Ceylon, and there we saw the wingtip mounted floats being brought down. But I suppose in the British context, Colin, it's in the Battle of the Atlantic that we think of the Catalina as earning its spurs.
Absolutely, it really did make the difference. The Atlantic Gap was the bit in the middle, as it were, that land operating aircraft weren't able to cover. The thing that Churchill said that he feared most was the effect of the U-boats and their attack on the shipping that would keep the UK supplied, and the anti-submarine role that this particular type of aircraft carried out during wartime really did make the difference.
The first major success for Catalinas in RAF service operationally was the locating of the German battleship Bismarck in May 1941. That wasn't long after the type had come into service. Later, in fact 70 years ago this year, 2 RAF Catalina pilots were awarded the Victoria Cross for their heroism. Flying Officer John Cruikshank of number 210 Squadron was one, and a Canadian, Flight Lieutenant David Hornell of Royal Canadian Air Force Unit number 162 Squadron was the other, both for pressing home attacks against U-boats while in the face of heavy fire. This one represents, as Colin was saying, an OA-10A version as used by the US Army Air Force by the 5th Emergency Rescue Squadron, stationed, as was mentioned, at Halesworth in Suffolk. And the action that led to the loss of the original missed pickup is worth relating, because on the 30th of March 1945, it had to land on the water while engaged in a rescue sortie, but the starboard engine failed and the aircraft couldn't take off again. It taxied for 90 minutes to get it away from the Dutch coast, but at midday the following day, Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters shot up the stricken Catalina. The crew abandoned it and took to dinghies. That was on the 31st of March. They weren't rescued, successfully I might add, until the 4th of April. As befits an aeroplane with long range in mind, this is a display aircraft that's been seen very, very widely over Europe. I remember commentating on this as an event in the Arctic Circle in the far north of Norway in 2012, during which year it also went to Moscow for the Russian Air Force centenary celebrations. plain sailing, very enthusiastic operators, and it's a shareholder group, of course, that is involved and owns it.
That's right, there are 20 shareholders that own and operate this particular aircraft. One of the shareholders is about to retire, so his share, that's a nice salute to the crowd there. The share, that one share, 20th of this aeroplane, and I think that actually is a pretty good value in the scale of things.
And the crew very much enjoy taking the aeroplane far and wide. They conduct regular water landings, notably at Duxford in France, which they use for waterborne training.
And in fact, this aircraft, as it's a seaplane, or it has the capability of a seaplane, is not only do you need to be able to fly it, but you also have to be able to handle it on the water, of course. And taxiing on the water is a whole different kettle of fish, because of course you've got no brakes, very susceptible to the effect of the wind and the tide and all those kind of things. So the aeroplane now back in its amphibian roll with the wheels down and showing a fairly good agility.
Yes, Canso, built by Canadian Vickers in Canada, this aeroplane, which came to Britain for operation by plain sailing in 2004. It's been used as a firebomber for many years after its Canadian service, initially in France with the Protection Civile, and later also by the province of Saskatchewan. Sole airworthy Catalina in Britain. There are a couple of others flying in Europe, but this one by far the most regularly seen. In fact, I think it does more air shows than any other Catalina worldwide.
Absolutely.
The crew captained today by Derek Head, a former RAF Hercules and Andover aircraft's coastal circumnavigation of the UK that it carried out last year, when it in fact established a new UK national record for that flight, recognised by the Royal Aero Club. It was airborne for some 3,317 kilometres.
And as he comes into land on the glass, no doubt, I think that's the hard, isn't it?
It certainly is, because we've got the PC-13 Cadet, the Beaver and the Rapide all going off the grass. It's a Catalina landing, Cosmic Wind running in above.
A cacophony of aircraft.
Well, here we see the tiny little Levere Cosmic Wind overhead.